Oh, the importance. I mean, first of all, I just want to say I'm not wearing my interpreting hat because I'm wearing my coder hat. Sign language is my home language, and I don't want to come across as I speak for deaf people or represent deaf people. I'm speaking it as my home language, and obviously, I feel the right for the language to be recognized. So that so many things can be in place because working or operating from a language that does not have a status of an official language, it does cause a lot of problems, mainly being accessibility, in general, in every platform and in every form.
Now you talk about speaking that sign language is your home language. Why is this?
My father is deaf, so South African Sign Language is my home language, and isiZulu is my first spoken language, but South African Sign Language is my home language. That's the language I grew up signing or speaking, and that's the language I express myself better in.
Now tell me about this process. Obviously, as a young child, learning that your father was deaf and having to learn the language, how did you navigate this? Obviously, where we're going is how everyone else around us can pick up some form of sign language to be able to communicate with those that do not hear.
Yes. It was a natural process, just like if you grew up and in the household where you live in, everybody is speaking Chivenda or Sipedi or isiZulu, you will naturally pick up that language. It is as natural as that. It's only when you grow up and you go outside of your household where things start to differ, because then your language is discriminated. And by the system, Section 30 speaks of everybody has a right to express themselves in the language of choice. And yet with South African Sign Language, that is not realized, and which is why it is important that the language is recognized. I mean, the matter is sitting with Parliament and all of that, but it is very important that it is recognized so that people like my father and the over 2 million sign language users and closed caption users can have access to everything that's happening in the country of their birth.
Now take us through what would be required for South African for sign language to be required to be recognized rather as the 12th language.
I mean, I don't work for Parliament or a lawyer. So, but I mean, as I've said, there are departments that are responsible for it, and Pan South African Language Board is also the right body to speak on it. But as a normal South African citizen, one would assume that there are a couple of law reviews that they have to go back to and change. Because if you look at the of the laws or the language policies, everything has to be reviewed and changed, and make sure that South African Sign Language gets that status and it is included. Even in such, besides ICASA saying every news broadcaster must be accessible, even corporate itself is not only government. Even corporate should be accessible. News, not only news, just any platform of media or any platform that is releasing information. My father should be able to open a TV and have access. A deaf young child should be able to open a kiddies program and be included because it is their human right. It's not a privilege that we provide accessibility by closed caption or by having a sign language interpreter. It is a right. It's not a privilege.
Well, I suppose you've touched on something pretty important, which really should have been my question, in that if sign language, or if and when sign language does become the official South African language, what will that landscape look like?
Ooh, it would, you would have a deaf person, for example, doing this interview rather than a person who was raised by a deaf parent, because it would be so natural for a deaf person to come on an interview and sign, and without struggling, would I get an interpreter? Would this interview be even accessible? Can I express myself in my language. I mean, my father, for example, was a stand-up comedian. And you, a hearing person, missed out because they don't know sign language. So he only catered for a deaf community. So the landscape is huge in terms of job opportunities, in terms of tourism, in terms of everything, basically, instead of health, in terms of the list is endless. I would not struggle to find out what is the Minister of Health now talking about. What's the status of corona, because I would have that information at the tap of my fingers. I would have access to anything that I want. But because it doesn't have that status as an official language, therefore, a majority of people of South Africa are discriminated by the system and by the law, because it is a lengthy process. It should be fast forward. So it just needs everybody. It needs the civil society, it needs the government, it needs the corporate, because it does take money to change policies and laws that have been there for years.
Interesting perspective that you brought in there around your father's, I don't know if it was his profession, but the fact that at some point he was a comedian. And it's not something that you ordinarily would think about.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. He's a very funny man. He's amazing. So I look at his material, you know, the low material that is there that's recorded, because you also know the culture of us African, we don't document our stories and we don't archive our own stories. So the low of material of my father when he was younger and he was on stage, I would go to his show, you know. And I mean, he would be amongst the legends that are celebrated today. But because he's deaf and there wasn't accessibility for him to be on other platforms, therefore, you know. So again, we need to recognize South African Sign Language as a 12th language. We need to work together. All the department, it's not only a social development problem or the Department of Women and Children and People with Disabilities. It needs all of us to make sure and advocate that it does get the status quo that it deserves.
And this one, that narrative that you gave, and as far as the importance of being able to turn on a TV station, listen to official communication, and that communication be given in sign language, brings us to the issue that you mentioned around COVID-19 and the coronavirus. Do you feel that the deaf community in the country has been prejudiced or disadvantaged in the amount of information that they've received over the last 12 or so months?
Without being the advocating for deaf people, but in terms of language itself, I don't want to say we are trying. There is no reason why any minister comes on a media platform such as Newsroom or any other platform, speak without an interpreter or speaking without closed caption, because not everybody who is deaf understands sign language. So there are a lot of things that we can do, and all the departments, there's really no need. In 2021, if you are a minister and you go on air without you being accessible, it really, we need to come to a point where we are making it a norm that we have over 2 million people who need access, especially when it comes to health. I mean, my father was in hospital last year, and I could only interpret for him via a video and all of that. And this was a private hospital. Even the private hospitals don't provide sign language interpreters. Even the medical aid scheme, they say it's not covered, you know. And what does a deaf person do? I mean, it's already a traumatic experience. And going to a hospital at this period, it's already a daunting thought. So now to go and not have access to what you're being injected, to what you've been given, to all of that, we really can do better as the people. And I think we must just use Ubuntu, because sometimes we go, no, the policy doesn't allow. We don't have the funds. We don't have this. just the spirit of Ubuntu. How do you expect a 69-year-old man in hospital who is deaf to have access to you as a doctor or to the nurses? It is really, it's really sickening. It is really disgusting. And it is something that we can change. We just need to open our minds and put yourself in that position.
I mean, those issues are definitely of a humanitarian nature. Now, I know you don't profess to speak for the deaf community, as you've said, but my question around is, has there been much advocacy in this regard? I mean, every single one of the things just about that you're talking about is absolutely relevant and makes so much sense.
There has been. We have deaf organizations, your SANDA, your DEFSA, the list is endless, your Disabilities Right, what not. But if we can take it as not a disability issue and take it on a language right, it's just, let's start it there. It is a linguistical right. So if we treat it like that, and not focus on, it's disability, therefore it belongs with that department, then you would find that other departments don't think that they should provide accessibility because they're looking at it as a welfare issue. No, it's a language issue, it's a linguistical right. It's not we're doing you a favor by providing accessibility. It is a right. It's like I'm saying, there's no way that there is a workshop on agriculture or on home, whatever, when that department goes to the communities and they want to talk about RPP houses and that. And if my father goes there, he doesn't have access. Sign language fits in everywhere because it's not a disability thing, it's a language thing. So if we can take it from that, expect a lot of things would be lightened.
My final question, Andiswa, before we let you go, is sign language universal?
No, it's not. There's South African Sign Language. Nicolinde, who's interpreting now, she's using South African Sign Language. So every country has its own sign language. There are sign languages. And then within South African Sign Language, there are different dialects because we have different cultures and come from different schools, come from different provinces. So a lot of things, just like isiZulu saseNkandla and isiZulu saseMlazi and isiZulu saseSoweto. It's all isiZulu, but they're different dialects. It's a language on its own that stands on its own, that has a culture, which is deaf culture.
Okay, well, I'm going to say goodbye now, and I'm going to say goodbye to you, Andiswa. Will you show me how I say goodbye, Andiswa, specifically? It's
just bye-bye. Bye-bye.
So I can't say bye-bye. I can't say bye-bye and say your name at the same time. It's just...
Oh, it's, yeah. Bye, Andiswa. Bye-bye, Andiswa. Yes. And this is the international sign for I love you. Yes. So this is the only sign that's the same everywhere in the world, which is I love you.
Well, we love you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.